Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here for Whatculture.com, and you know what, as much as first impressions count for quite a lot, there's arguably nothing more important in a movie than how it ends. After all, every other scene in the film leads up to that final point, and if it leaves audiences exiting the cinema baffled, irritated, or downright angry, it will often taint their opinion of the entire movie, no matter how great it might have been. Now granted, not all films are designed to leave viewers feeling warm and fuzzy inside, but all the same, these 10 movies had audiences practically foaming at the mouth as the end credits rolled. So let's take a look at them today as Whatculture.com, and these are movies that pissed audiences off in their final scene. Star Wars: Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars: Rise of Skywalker is easily the most divisive Star Wars movie since the prequels, with many fans expressing frustration that it took the most predictably nostalgia-baiting storytelling path possible, indicative that the sequel trilogy really had no clear-cut plan before it got started. While the majority of the movie is at least a watchable, passably entertaining sci-fi flick for fans who can excuse its rather ham-fisted plot, it saves its most cardinal and most insulting sin for the very end. As Rey returns to Luke Skywalker's childhood home on Tatooine, an elderly passerby asks her name, to which she replies, Rey Skywalker, leaving a good portion of the audience groaning in second-hand embarrassment. Understandable as it was that Rey wanted to ditch the Palpatine name, adopting the Skywalker moniker didn't feel remotely earned, but rather a lazy, excessively sentimental attempt to further tie the central character together. And you know what would have been better? If we just didn't hear her reply, just leaving at least something for the audiences to chew on rather than pandering to the worst, most syrupy instincts of the fan base.
Lucy. When Lucy finally unlocks 100% of her brain capacity, causing her to undergo an epic transformation. She hits that 100% just as she's about to get shot in the head, causing her to suddenly disappear into thin air, much to the amazement of everyone in the room. At this point, Lucy has transcended her physical form and entered the space-time continuum, where she now possesses the ability to be everywhere all at once, while leaving behind a USB stick containing all of her accrued knowledge to help humanity. Though Lucy doesn't turn into a USB stick, as many flippantly suggest, the ending isn't really much less ridiculous than that. The many viewers hoping to see Lucy go full-on Super Saiyan mode at the end were surely left disappointed that she just disappeared, and the film then hastily ended totally out of nowhere.
Gone Girl. David Fincher's Gone Girl is an expertly crafted psychological thriller, but nevertheless is one that left viewers screaming with frustration at the screen during its grimly ironic ending. Nick eventually discovers that his wife Amy faked her own disappearance and framed him for her murder as revenge for his infidelity. After Amy finally returns home, Nick plans to leave her, but in the film's brutal ending, she reveals that she impregnated herself with some of Nick's sperm, which was stored at a fertility clinic. An infuriated Nick violently confronts Amy, only for her to remind him that if he attempts to leave her, he'll be vilified by the public. Nick, feeling responsible for his unborn child regardless of the circumstances, reluctantly decides to stay with Amy, much to the anger of his sister Margot, and indeed the audience. Now, it is a brilliant ending, crystallizing the film's discomforting examination of relationship dynamics and the role of the media in ordinary lives, but also one that expertly engineers itself to have viewers ready to hurl something at the bloody screen. The Mist. This entertaining sci-fi horror film is a bit of a litmus test for audiences, because its almost unbelievably grim final scene will either make you love the film even more or swear off it forever. At the end of it, protagonist David and a small group of fellow survivors decide that there's no hope left to survive this current alien invasion, and so enter a suicide pact to spare themselves very painful deaths. David uses his remaining bullets to shoot the other survivors and also his young son, and then exits his car so he can quickly be consumed by the monsters in the mist. But at that moment, something other than a giant monster emerges through that mist, and it's a tank, followed by a sizable army fleet, confirming that humanity has successfully fought back against the aliens. Basically, David killed 4 people, including his own son, for nothing, and had he waited just a few minutes longer, he never would have had to commit such a heinous act. To further rub salt in the wound, David even catches sight of a woman who left the supermarket earlier in the movie in pursuit of her children, alive and well with her kids. Oof. Yeah, most of us would probably be raging at the sheer downbeat daring of it all.
Planet of the Apes 2001. Tim Burton admittedly had an incredibly tough task when remaking the Planet of the Apes, given how iconic and unforgettable the original endings is, with Charlton Heston's character learning that the titular planet was actually a post-apocalyptic Earth all along. Rather than simply repeat that ending to an audience who largely knew it was coming, Burton came up with something different, something totally silly and outrageous, which proved far more of a damp squib than just redoing the beloved ending we all knew. In the final scene, Mark Wahlberg's character attempts to travel home by passing back through the electromagnetic storm and arrives in Washington, D.C. He approaches the Lincoln Memorial, which is now revealed to have the likeness of General Thade, before he's swarmed by cops, firefighters and news reporters, all of whom resemble apes, and the film abruptly ends without further explanation. It's an ending that totally baffled just about everybody, and not in a good way. It's made worse by the utter lack of context, and Burton's later admission that it was written purely as sequel bait, without any logical explanation in mind.
No Country for Old Men. The Coen brothers' Best Picture winning thriller is arguably the best movie of their pretty brilliant back catalogue, a deliriously entertaining genre film which brings Cormac McCarthy's rich novelisation vision to the screen with incredible skill. But it's also a film which upended audience expectations in a pretty major way, by refusing to give them the typical genre trimmings that they were surely anticipating. The story is set up for viewers to expect a traditional showdown between the film's closest thing to a hero, Moss, and the Terminator-like antagonist attempting to reclaim $2 million in cash, Anton. But ultimately, Moss ends up being killed off-screen by random Mexican gangsters at the end of the film's second act, leaving audiences to assume that the weathered sheriff might actually be the only one to take down Anton. Except that never happens, because there's never any sort of major standoff between the pair at all. Anton manages to get away, presumably with the money, while Bell retires from the police, and the final scene simply sees him explaining two of his recent deeply allegorical dreams to his wife. Anyone expecting a traditional cathartic ending, as many definitely were totally out of luck, because the Coens removed it in favour of one that let the bad guy get away and the only hero left standing unable to do anything about it. Night of the Living Dead. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead was the cultural primer for the modern zombie movie, an expertly crafted effort which remains deeply unsettling today. But the film's true, aggravating masterstroke arrives in its very final scene, where the only remaining member of the central group, Ben, manages to survive until dawn, only to find himself accidentally shot dead by an incoming posse, which mistakes him for one of the undead. An ingenious piece of social commentary as it is, especially with the film releasing in the midst of the civil rights movement, many nevertheless felt robbed of a happy ending for Ben, who with his resourcefulness throughout had surely earned himself the right to live. While Romero insisted in interviews for the rest of his life that Ben's death wasn't intended to pass commentary on racism, it's practically impossible not to view the film that way through a contemporary lens, and you know what, it's all the better for it. Whatever your own reading though, Ben being struck down as the result of idiotic human error was a guaranteed way to leave audiences seething with rage as the end credits rolled.
Passengers. Passengers is a film that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way from the jump, given that it revolves around a colonist, Jim Preston, who is accidentally woken from stasis 90 years early and, in order to stave off crushing loneliness, wakes up a sexy fellow colonist, Aurora Lane. For many, the problem wasn't Jim's desperate act, but how the film frames it, using it as a launching pad for a star-crossed romance that ultimately downplays the horrifying nature of what he did. And this is never more palpably felt than during the epilogue, where Jim figures out a way for Aurora to go back into stasis, but she ultimately decides to stay with him to live out their lives on board the ship. In the final scene, set 80 years later, the ship's crew finally awakens as they arrive at their destination, while a voiceover from Aurora, who is presumably now dead, recounts the full life she and Jim lived together. Ultimately, it just felt like too much of a hand wave of the fact that Aurora was woken up without her consent and then, depending on your interpretation, potentially gaslit into falling in love with Jim.
Law-Abiding Citizen. Law-Abiding Citizen is a ludicrously entertaining guilty pleasure movie following a man, Clyde Shelton, who seeks revenge on the corrupt, ineffective justice system for allowing the murderer of his wife and daughter to get away with just a light sentence. Shelton embarks on a murderous crusade against anyone involved with supporting the current legal system, culminating in him plotting to blow up City Hall as the ultimate statement of protest. However, the film's ending turns the tables on Shelton in a pretty unsatisfying way. Despite being imprisoned by this point in the movie, Shelton has been using a secret tunnel to continue his revenge scheme in secret. And after setting up the bomb and returning to his cell, he's greeted by his former attorney, Nick Rice. After Nick tries to reason with him, Clyde activates the bomb. but Nick has sneakily moved it inside Clyde's cell, resulting in Clyde's death in an explosive fireball. The film's final scene then shows Nick attending his daughter's musical recital, an event that he previously hadn't ever made time for, seeming to suggest that Nick somehow has become a better person by blowing a criminal to pieces with his own bomb? Right, okay. Given that the movie does a frankly disturbing job of convincing audiences to root for Shelton, many were left deeply frustrated by an ending which flipped this on its head, suddenly taking the moral imperative through Jamie Foxx's unbearably smug hero. And let's be honest, most of us wanted Shelton's plan to succeed. The Grey. Liam Neeson's 2011 survival thriller The Grey was an unfortunate victim of its own misleading marketing. The film's trailers presented it as a film in which Neeson's protagonist John faces off against not only the elements but a pack of wolves that are stalking him and his fellow oilmen who are stranded in the Alaskan wilderness. But this film was ultimately a far more philosophical and thoughtful flick than anyone expected, and the teased showdown between John and the pack of wolves never actually happens. Well, it does happen, but only off-screen, as the film's final scene cuts to black just as John begins his desperate final assault against the alpha of the pack, leaving many viewers exasperated that the very thing that they paid their money to see is never actually shown. To perhaps irritate audiences even more, a post-credit scene briefly shows the aftermath of the fight, with the alpha wolf mortally wounded and John's fate left unclear. In the director's cut, it was actually described that the wolf battle was actually filmed, but they decided against actually using it, and criticised the marketing itself for creating an inaccurate representation of what the movie was really about. Still, in the cinemas watching it, where's my wolf battle?
The Predator. Shane Black's The Predator admittedly pissed franchise fans off throughout its entire runtime, and so its mesmerisingly daft ending was really just the terrible cherry on top. In a sequel-baiting epilogue, Quinn and his son Rory are observing the opening of the cargo the Predator left behind for humanity, which Rory deduces is described as a Predator killer weapon. The pod opens and out emerges a floating gauntlet, which then attaches itself to a nearby scientist's arm and forms an Iron Man-like suit around him, complete with a comical array of shoulder-mounted weaponry. The suit eventually deactivates, and Quinn implies that he'll be using it to help fend off any predators who invade Earth with malevolent intent. It's a deeply silly ending that underlines Fox's lazy attempt to reinvent the Predator franchise as a superhero-esque blockbuster IP with this movie. For years, fans have been asking for the Predator series to get back to the most basic efficiency of the original film, but this was the total opposite of that.
The Last American Virgin. On the surface, 1982's The Last American Virgin is a pretty typical sex comedy for its era, tackling all of the expected themes relevant to hormonal youngsters, until that is, it hits its brutal final scene. The film revolves around the titular high schooler protagonist Gary, who, beyond his numerous bungled attempts to get laid, falls hard for the gorgeous new transfer student Karen. After Karen gets pregnant by Gary's meathead pal Rick, good guy Gary not only pays for the abortion but looks after Karen in the aftermath, all the while Rick is nowhere to be seen. Just as it seems like there might actually be a future for Gary and Karen, the final scene delivers the crushing knockout of a reveal that Karen has actually forgiven Rick and gone back to him. The film's final moments show Gary solemnly driving home in tears as the end credits roll, providing zero emotional catharsis for viewers who were surely expecting the guy to get the girl of his dreams. Understandably, anyone approaching this as a feel-good movie was likely infuriated by how anti that actually was. So yeah, if you're about to watch this, be warned.
Alien Covenant. It's always a bit depressing when a movie ends on a blindingly obvious note that it clearly thinks is clever and surprising, and that's Alien Covenant's final scene in a nutshell. After Daniels and Tennessee finally eliminate the Xenomorph threat, they prepare to go into hypersleep. But as Daniels drifts off, she realises that android Walter isn't Walter at all. Rather, it's his malevolent quote-unquote brother David who, it's implied, killed or deactivated Walter and switched places with him in what might be the most telegraphed cinematic double-cross of all time. That Daniels, an otherwise smart and resourceful character, didn't see this coming makes her look spectacularly stupid. And because every movie needs a sequel tease these days, we then see David regurgitating to facehugger embryos, the implication being that he will continue his macabre and murderous experiments on Daniels and Tennessee. It's also obvious and uncreative, which proved all the more disappointing given the pre-release hype touting the Covenant was a major return to form for the Alien series.